Welcome back to the Broadman Word, and we are now getting into the part where we see Gideon become the warrior that we kind of know him to be. If you have been in the church a while, you've heard and have been a believer for a while, you probably have heard the story of Gideon where he gets like 300 men and he takes out a whole army. And he doesn't really even do that much fighting, but he is seen as this very brave human being. And yet, the very first part of his life is filled with fear and doubt. And yet, he starts to make a turn. And now, at the end of chapter 6 in the book of Judges, and now in chapter 7, he really starts to become the warrior that we kind of know him to be. So, Judges chapter 7, we're going to start in verse 1. Then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him, rose early and encamped beside the spring of Harod, and the camp of Midian was north of them, by the hill of Moreh in the valley. Now, there's a couple things that we have to remember with this first verse before we go any further. It's interesting to me that the text doesn't use Gideon's name. Now, yes, it's in the parentheses if your version has the parentheses there, but it goes by the name Jerubbaal, and I think that's really important to understand, to remember and understand from chapter 6. So turn with me back to chapter 6. We're going to go back to chapter 6, verse 32, and this is after he has been found out that he destroyed his father's altar to Baal. And they give him this name, which means, in verse 32, let Baal contend against him because he broke down his altar. And that's in chapter 6, verse 32. So, first off, I mean, that is really interesting that the writer goes with that name. Instead of Gideon, he goes with Jerubbaal, which I think is interesting because he's about to go on this huge, just miraculous battle cry and battle victory, even though he is supposedly at a moment's notice going to be struck down by Baal, which of course we know is not going to happen because Baal does not exist and he's not an actual god. But yet, even then, the person that saves Israel, even though they are waiting for Baal to destroy Gideon, it never happens, and yet he's the one that saves Israel. I think that's ironic. I think that's incredibly humorous, but I also think it's incredibly important too that if we believe in the Lord, that we stick by our belief in Him. And also, it's important to remember too that the Midian encampment or the Midian army that's talked about in verse 1 is not just Midian. So, chapter 6, verse 33, now all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east came together, and they crossed the Jordan and encamped in the valley of Jezreel. So, the army that is talked about, the Midian army that is talked about in chapter 7, verse 1, is not just Midian, it's also some other countries as well. So this is a huge, huge force. So that's where we get to verse 2. So the Lord said to Gideon, the people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand, lest Israel boast over me, saying, my own hand has saved me. Now therefore proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return home and hurry away from Mount Gilead. Then 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained. So, the Lord is basically saying that, look, the fact that there's 22,000, or 32,000, sorry, I did my math wrong there. So the fact that there's 32,000, that's great, but the Lord's saying, look, if the battle is won with 32,000, Israel will say, well, it's because of us. And so the Lord is like, I want them to be in all of me and to be in all of my glory and to see me as their as their savior, as their deliverer. And so that's why he makes this proclamation that whoever is scared about the upcoming battle, please go home. And it's striking to me that of the 32,000, 22,000 people returned. Um, that's striking me in itself. And so now we have 10,000. So we go from 32,000 to 10,000. Not bad, but we don't know the numbers of the Midian army with the Amalekites and the other countries from the east, but it's definitely bigger. It's definitely bigger than possibly 32,000, but definitely bigger than 10,000. But that's the point, right? So let's go back. Verse 4 here. And the Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Take them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. And anyone of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, shall go with you. And anyone of whom I say to you, this one shall not go with you, shall not go. So he brought the people down to the water. And the Lord said to Gideon, everyone who laps the water with his tongue as a dog laps, you shall set by himself. Likewise, everyone who kneels down to drink. And the number of those who lapped, putting their hands to their mouths, was 300 men. But all the rest of the people knelt down to drink water. And the Lord said to Gideon, with the 300 men who lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hand, and let all the others go, every man to his home. So the people took provisions in their hands and their trumpets. And he sent all the rest of Israel, every man to his tent, but retained the 300 men. And the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. So we've now gone from 10,000 to 300. 9,700 people go home. I mean, it's getting to the point where it just seems impossible. But again, that's the point, because God works with the impossible, right? So, however, it's interesting with this passage, not just with the 300 men, why 300, why only 300, I mean, but I think it's interesting this pare down. The first pare down from 32,000 to 10,000 kind of makes some sense. You don't want soldiers that are scared of war in your army, because when time hits, when war happens, they're not going to be the best soldiers. They're also probably not going to stick up for the soldiers around them either, because they're scared of war, which, again, nothing wrong with that. I get that. I think I'd be a scaredy cat in war too. Just being honest, I would like to think that I'm brave, but in that situation, I don't know if I would be. So there's nothing wrong with that. But here, it's a little bit more complex, I think, when it goes down from 10,000 to 300. I think there's something else there. And so when we look at this test that God puts to Gideon in verse 5 about the lapping with water, or those that kneel down and drink, I think it gets down to the desperate nature that we have. And so for the ones who lap, they are eager to do what Gideon says, but they're also in a point of desperation where they are dependent on their leader, and they are dependent upon Gideon. Whereas the other ones, they're kneeling to drink, they're taking their time. It seems like they're a little bit more self-focused, maybe, is what I would say. Instead of doing what Gideon says, I mean, they still drink from the water, but they take their time with it, and it almost seems like they're just a little bit more independent. And I think what this test is getting at is the dependency on the one who is in charge. And obviously for us, that person is Jesus, and that person is God. And so I think that is the distinction there. Again, there could be some cultural aspect to it, maybe, but I think it really kind of boils down to the dependence on the person that they are following after, whether it is Gideon in this passage for the soldiers, or it is the Lord for us as believers. I think that's kind of what's going on in my kind of opinion. In my opinion, I think that's what's going on, which is a beautiful picture. So now we're going to wrap up with verses 9 through 14 here. And this is the really just leading up to the battle. So verse 9, that same night the Lord said to him, arise, go down against the camp, for I have given it into your hand. But if you are afraid to go down to the camp with Purah, your servant, and you shall hear what they say, and afterward your hand shall be strengthened to go down against the camp. Then he went down with Purah, his servant, to the outposts of the armed men who were in the camp. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with having doubts, or questions. So, am I saying that Gideon is wrong to do this? No. I mean, I would like to think that he's beginning to trust the Lord, but I mean, we all have questions. So, if I was in Gideon's spot, I would probably go down and hear what the camp is saying. And it's not like the Lord is saying, and if you go down, you are wrong to go down and hear. No, he's just giving them that option. If you have questions, here's the answers. And I think that's cool to see that. So verse 12. And the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the people of the east lay along the valley like locusts in abundance, and their camels were without number, as the sand that is on the seashore in abundance. So again, we're not given an exact number of this opposing force, but my goodness, this picture kind of paints a picture that this is an impossible task, not just for 300, but 10,000, probably even 32,000 soldiers. This is an impossible task. So now that we've gone from 32,000 to 300, it's even more. so, so verse 13, when Gideon came, behold, a man was telling a dream to his comrade. And he said, behold, I dreamed a dream, and behold, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian, and came to the tent, and struck it, so that it fell, and turned it upside down, so that the tent lay flat. And his comrade answered, this is no other than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has given into his hand Midian and all the camp. So the vision is just this idea that there is going to be something that comes into the camp and destroys Midian, and the comrade says it's Gideon and this man of Israel that we have heard about. And the fact that they've even heard about him is kind of crazy, but that just shows that that the Lord is in control, that he's orchestrating this battle for Gideon before the battle has even happened, and obviously during the battle he'll orchestrate it all. So that's where we're gonna stop. We're gonna stop there. Gideon has heard this dream, and he is going to then call for the Israelites to come together and to march off against Midian, but in a very interesting way that is dependent upon the Lord. So we're going to get to that on Thursday. However, I will see you with Broadman Word tomorrow. Thanks.